Game of Thrones from Elden Ring to the Young Wolf Lord. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51. The Battlefield of Two. The mountain's strength was beyond everyone's expectation. It was normal for a knight to wear a chainmail under his armor, but the mountain's armor was not an ordinary armor. No one thought that the mountain wore an extremely heavy chainmail inside his armor. Daisy was absolutely sure to cut off the ordinary chainmail directly, but the mountain's was not possible. Go to hell. The mountain's roar resounded throughout the battlefield. He just felt the threat of death. A substance called adrenaline, but no one knew what it was called yet, was secreted crazily in his body. He waved his arms desperately and directly lifted up Little John, who was pressing down on his right hand. In Little John's incredible eyes, the mountain directly twisted Little John's neck. Without the pressure of one person, the other four could no longer control the mountain. The mountain struggled to stand up again. He grabbed Daisy Mormont, who was lying on his chest, directly. She was the direct source of the threat of death. Like throwing a bug, the mountain threw her out, hit her hard against the wall, and then fell down with weak limbs. The other three centurions were also caught by the mountain, and were either thrown out, or thrown out after their necks were broken. In just a few minutes, the mountain turned defeat into victory, and defeated the 5 centurions. Long live Lord Mountain. Long live Clegane. Long live Lannister. The Nottipod and Sweetmouth Raff, who had been watching the battle, instantly showed ecstatic expressions. They knew that from now on, no matter how amazing the legendary Wolf Riders were, there was no possibility of a comeback at this moment. Unless Lord Mountain died instantly, but how could that happen? Long live. The Mountain's men also regained their confidence. Although they were still a little afraid when looking at the Wolf Riders, they believed that, as long as they followed Lord Mountain, they would be invincible. The faces of the Bracken family were all covered with a shadow at this moment. They had experienced too much today. The despair at the beginning, the hope of the arrival of the Wolf Riders, and now the mountain broke this hope with his own hands. This kind of pain is more intense than having no hope at the beginning. It's over. It's all over. Henry Bracken muttered to himself. The others did not speak again. They were completely terrified. Beth's face was gloomy, and she prayed silently in her heart. 7 gods, if you can save my family in Stonehenge City, I'm willing to go to the monastery to become a nun and serve for life. I don't know whether she was not favored by the 7 gods or her prayer was not heard by the 7 gods. Nothing happened on the battlefield. The mountain army, which had recovered from the shock, began to counterattack again. The situation fell to the mountain again. Is it over? Beth's face was full of despair. AWW. A loud wolf howl interrupted the gradually rising momentum of the mountain army on the battlefield. Then, a huge dire wolf appeared on the city wall, overlooking the battlefield from a high position. However, no one focused on the dire wolf, because next to it stood a tall figure. He had reddish brown hair and dark blue eyes, a strong figure, wearing a close-fitting and simple leather armor, and holding a long sword in his hand. The battlefield seemed to be stagnant at this moment, and everyone stopped fighting at this moment. That figure seemed to have an innate aura that made people dare not ignore it. After seeing that figure, the Wolf Riders knelt down together, then immediately picked up their weapons, and confronted the mountain's men. Your Majesty Robb. It must be His Majesty Robb, the king in the north. Your Majesty Robb. It's Robb. That kid from Stark. We are going to get rich. Catch Robb. Maybe we can become knights and property knights right away. King Joffrey won't be so stingy. Maybe we can become barons. What are you dreaming about, idiot? The performance of the Wolf Riders instantly made the people on the battlefield understand the identity of that person. In an instant, the last hope, greedy eyes, all eyes with complex emotions surrounded Robb. Beth Bracken looked at Robb's figure, and a glimmer of hope rose in her heart again. Is this the salvation brought to her by the 7 gods hearing her call? Robb didn't care about what others thought. He reached out and stroked Grey Wind's neck, then performed the hound steps and appeared in front of the mountain with a few flashes. Ignoring the mountain's terrifying eyes, Robb looked around and looked at his 5 centurions. As a centurion of wolf riders, your performance on the battlefield can only be described as mediocre. Daisy Mormont's head was already dizzy after the collision, and her body was in great pain, but she still heard Robb's words, and lowered her head in shame. Little John might also be ashamed, but his neck had been broken by the mountain and he could not hear any sound. Robb waved his hand. After returning, you still need to practice more, and don't let this happen again. The mountain's dull voice sounded from the flat top helmet. Huh? What are you talking about? I have broken the necks of these little pets you raised. It doesn't matter, but this is not something you should worry about. Robb's height in front of the mountain was like a child who had just learned to walk standing in front of an adult. But Robb spoke as if he was that adult. The Notapad laughed. Lord Mountain, twist off the head of that fake king. Sweetmouth Raph also began to cheer. Kill him, Lord Mountain. Beth on the side was also puzzled. Why is your majesty standing alone in front of the mountain? Why don't the people around go up to protect him? In their opinion, Robb has entered the attack range of the mountain. The mountain only needs to attack suddenly and swing his two-handed sword, and Robb's life may be threatened. But Robb did not step back, and there were no guards around who wanted to go up to protect him. They didn't know that from the perspective of the wolf riders, the mountain was now in the hunting range of the blood wolf. It's just that the poor prey has not realized what happened. He even raised his sword and wanted to swing the sword at His Majesty Robb. What a ridiculous thing. The mountain raised his two-handed sword in his hand. He thought Robb might be crazy. In that case, I will send you to the 7 gods. There, you can reunite with your puppies, train them well, and tell them to run when they see me. The mountain had no hesitation or mercy. The two-handed giant sword in his hand pressed towards Robb like a landslide. It only took a second for this little wolf cub who proclaimed himself king to die. The mountain thought so, but the next second, what he saw was not the tragic scene of blood splattering on Robb's body. Instead, it was the miracle of countless black and red flames suddenly emerging from Robb's body. Thanks to Lady Zoo for the reward. Chapter 52. One meal for 2 guests. Black flame protection, iron body, golden tree blessing. Many defensive spells have been cast on Robb. Robb's body is indestructible at this moment, and his physical attributes such as strength have also been greatly improved. Facing the sword that the mountain chopped with all his strength, Robb did not move at all, but just stretched out his right hand lightly. Bang! The mountain's two-handed giant sword was like hitting a diamond, making a dull sound, and then stopped. Robb gently grabbed the mountain's two-handed giant sword with his palm. He was standing in front of the mountain, facing the giant sword that was heavier than himself. Robb just moved a few fingers lightly and pinched it. The mountain's pupils swelled rapidly, and before his brain could process the current situation, his body instinctively began to retract his sword. But the two-handed giant sword was like being inserted into a stone. No matter how hard the mountain tried, the sword did not move at all. The mountain made an incredible sound. This is impossible. Don't be so surprised. As a king, it is natural for you to have this power. Robb smiled and loosened his hands. The mountain lost his balance due to inertia and fell to the ground. Robb took a step forward and stepped on the mountain's chest. The mountain suddenly felt like a small mountain was pressing on him. He couldn't catch his breath. His face turned red and he began to cough violently. Then Robb raised his right hand slightly and a golden thunder spear appeared in his hand. The mountain lay on the ground in disbelief, wondering how the man in front of him could perform such a real miracle. It's too easy for you to die like this. Even if you cut down all the trees in the wolf forest and make paper, you can't write down all the crimes you committed. I declare here in the name of the King of the North, that you will not die a violent death. For the rest of your life, you will bear all the pain until the end of your life. And what I say is reality. After Robb finished speaking, he pressed the thunder spear in his hand directly against the mountain's face. The powerful electric current instantly traveled through the thick steel armor and all over the body of the mountain. The mountain's body began to tremble violently. He wanted to struggle and curse everything in the world, but the paralysis brought by the thunder made him unable to do anything. The mountain lay on the battlefield. Although he was not dead, he could no longer move and take other people's lives at will. Winter is coming. The wolf riders, who had been silent all the time, finally shouted the slogan they would only shout when they were about to win. Long live the King of the North. Long live His Majesty Robb. Long live the King of the North. Long live His Majesty Robb. Long live the King of the North. Long live His Majesty Robb. On the battlefield, the soldiers of Stonehenge City shouted 3 times, and their morale reached an unprecedented height. Many of them wanted to kneel down and kiss the land Robb had stepped on. The women on the Bracken family side also regained their spirits. They shouted Robb's name like crazy, wanting to rush to his side and fight for him. Everything that happened today was too exciting. Hope and despair appeared twice in a short period of time. It was good that their spirits did not collapse. The fall of the mountain was like a spark next to a barrel of explosives. Everyone's emotions were released at this moment. They shouted Robb's name and began to slaughter the enemies in front of them. Under the leadership of the Wolf Riders, although their numbers were not dominant, the battlefield at this moment was no longer determined by the advantage of numbers. The mountain's men were all stunned. They couldn't believe that their commander, the man they respected and feared the most, was completely defeated by Robb with just one move. The Nottapod and the Sweetmouth Raff were cheering for the mountain at first. The next second, both of them fell into a stagnation. Then they were knocked unconscious by the crazy Bracken family guards and lay straight on the ground. The rest of the battle was a one-sided massacre. Robb took a simple look and lost interest. This was just a small battle. The victory or defeat was determined by the soldiers' momentum. Now the momentum of their side has reached the top and no longer needs to be commanded. The Red Monk Thoros came to Robb quickly and said, "Your Majesty, you defeated the mountain. He is a thug famous in the Lannister continent. At least 1/5 of the families on the continent want to thank you for your feat. As the most loyal dog of Lannister, the mountain committed crimes on the continent and made enemies with many nobles. Among them, the biggest enemy was the Martell family, the Guardian family of Dawn. He once raped the daughter of the Martell family." Robb waved his hand and said, "The mountain is just a small roll. The old land Tywin is the big fish. This is not an honor worth boasting about. You should prepare and hold a ceremony for my Wolf Riders. Since the Lord of Light wanted to show his goodwill to him, and threw this Red Monk to him, he must not eat here for nothing." The Red Monk Thoros was a little flattered. You want me to hold a ceremony for the Lord of Light for them? But I still don't understand what this power is." Robb interrupted him and said, "You don't need to understand, just do it." On the battlefield, the riots were quickly settled. If Robb hadn't asked his men to capture as many people alive as possible, Stonehenge would have returned to peace long ago. The Red Monk Thoros went to arrange the ceremony, and the members of the Bracken family were brought to Robb. Hendry Bracken said with gratitude and admiration, "Your Majesty, thank you for your help. If you hadn't come, I can't believe what terrible things would have happened." Robb's face was expressionless. "If I remember correctly, my ravens should have arrived at Stonehenge long ago, and you should be in Riverrun now." Hendry Bracken stammered and couldn't speak. For the first time, Harry Rivers was grateful for his illegitimate status. He was not qualified to face Robb directly. "Your Majesty, Hendry wanted to explain and get away with it. "I warn you, never lie to your Majesty. Think carefully before you speak." Sir Stevron Free, who was standing aside, had some friendship with Stonehenge. He interrupted Hendry before he spoke. Hendry looked at Stevron, who didn't look at him at all. "Ah. Yes, we dare not hide it from your Majesty." Hendry suddenly recalled Robb's horror on the battlefield just now. He dared not think about how to deceive, but told Earl Bracken everything. Robb glanced at Stevron and said nothing. Robb said lightly, "It seems that the Lords of the Riverland still don't trust me." The people of the Bracken family broke out in a cold sweat instantly. Hendry wanted to say something, but was interrupted by a scout. "Your Majesty, there is an army moving towards us. It is estimated that the number of people is 5 times ours. It will reach Stonehenge in about an hour." Robb sneered. "There are 2 guests at this table in Stonehenge. In the past 2 days, some readers said that my story is not good. In response to this problem, the author has reflected on it, because the author feels that the climax without foreplay is boring. There may be some redundant descriptions in the foreplay part, which makes some readers feel that it is not good. The feedback from readers is the author's gain. The author will adjust this degree and reduce this part of the content appropriately in the future. PS. Finally, I would like to ask for monthly tickets. Chapter 53, Empty City Retreat Lion. Hearing the report from the scout, the faces of the Bracken family members showed nervous expressions again. Human strength has its limits. The defenders of Stonehenge City have been exhausted after a series of bloody battles. Coupled with the momentum that just broke out, they are completely exhausted. Some people are so weak that they can't even pick up their weapons. If they fight with so many enemy troops at this time, they will definitely not be able to play any role. Are they going to be captured by the enemy again after being rescued? Beth Bracken looked at her family members exuding uneasy emotions, but she felt a sense of peace in her heart. She secretly glanced at His Majesty Robb. His Majesty's face was fearless. Maybe even if a dragon appeared in front of him, this man would not show any emotions. Just follow His Majesty, it will be fine, she thought. Sir Stevron Free stood beside Robb. Your Majesty, the ritual of the Red Monk Thoros is still being prepared. The dead wolf riders cannot be resurrected in a short time. If the enemy attacks now. Robb glanced at the battlefield. 3 centurions of the wolf riders died, and 2 were dying. Their combat effectiveness was greatly reduced. Although the defenders of Stonehenge City were in good spirits, their fighting capacity was poor. If they fought with the enemy at this time, they would be at a disadvantage. After all, they were the only one who was intact. Flay the mountain skin, and hang all his men on the city wall. Hold my banner high on the city wall, and arrange a few wolf riders to stand on the city wall. Open the city gate. As a host, you must be polite to your guests. Sir Stevron Free looked at Robb in surprise, not knowing the deep meaning of His Majesty Robb's actions. Why open the city gate? It is much better to have the protection of the city wall than to have the city gate wide open. The people of the Bracken family also looked at each other, not knowing what to say, but no one would refute Robb's order now. After killing the mountain, the people of the Bracken family believed that their father, including many people like their father in the Riverlands, would no longer doubt His Majesty Robb's orders. It was not because His Majesty Robb had excellent strategic vision. It was because His Majesty Robb had the ability to slaughter the mountain's troops with just a few hundred people. And they couldn't even hold off the mountain's troops for an hour with their backs against the city wall. If you don't obey the orders of His Majesty Robb, do you want to be the next mountain? When the criticism of weapons is strong enough, nothing else matters. The remaining wolf riders took the defenders of Stonehenge and began to carry out His Majesty Robb's orders. But when they skinned the mountain, they encountered difficulties. Although the mountain had been trapped by several chains, the fierce expression on his face still scared away the skinning soldiers. Let me do it. I'm over 60 years old. This kind of look can't scare me. Sir Stevron Free volunteered and began to dance the knife slowly and gracefully under the guidance of the knight from the Dreadfort. A skinned soldier was fixed on each spear. They were howling in pain under the scorching sun. No one knew what kept them alive. One person, or body, was particularly eye-catching. He was obviously much taller than the others, and his screams were louder than everyone else's. He needed 3 spears to hold him down, because even though he was skinned, he was still struggling violently. Below him, the huge armor with the Clegane family pattern made everyone understand the identity of the monster, the mountain. Under each spear, stood a wolf rider. Their expressions were solemn and their eyes were sharp. They looked at the phalanx of Lannister soldiers, like falcons soaring in the sky staring at their prey. My lord, that seems to be Lord Clegane. Kevin Lannister's guards trembled. He was terrified by the scene in front of him. That was the mountain. The most loyal dog of the Lannister family, the most terrifying anger. Now, just like a real dog, they were skinned and hung on the spears, without honor or dignity. Kevin Lannister turned around and shouted angrily, "Don't waste your words. My eyes are not blind. I know that is a mountain." "Yes, sir." Kevin Lannister looked at the torso and elite soldiers on the city wall, and then looked at the wide open city gate, and fell silent for a while. According to the original plan, the mountain attacked Stonehenge. Robb would get the news, and fight a bloody battle with the mountain's team inside Stonehenge. He was only an hour away from Stonehenge, and this distance could not be shorter. The movement of a team of 5,000 people was not small, and there was a high possibility that they would be discovered. By the time he came to support, the battle situation between the two sides should be very tense. That's the mountain. But why is he hanging directly on the city wall now? This is different from the agreed script. In Kevin Lannister's view, the quiet city gate at this time was like the dark abyss of a huge monster. As long as he led his men to rush over, the monster would devour him. While Kevin Lannister was hesitating, the guard pointed at the city wall and shouted again, "My lord, look, what is that?" Kevin Lannister looked up and saw a young man sitting on a wide chair under the protection of many people. Reddish brown hair, blue eyes, young man. It was Robb, the self-proclaimed king of the north. At this time, Robb was also looking at Kevin Lannister with interest, but unlike his cautiousness, Robb did not take him seriously at all. Robb was surrounded by women from the Bracken family instead of guards. Beth Bracken sat on Robb's lap and poured wine for him carefully. The other women squatted beside Robb with fruits in their hands, and there was no panic on their faces. Their absurd appearance made Kevin Lannister furious. How could this be? They didn't take me seriously at all. And if the other side had enough troops, they wouldn't have to put on such a show for him to watch. Wouldn't it be better to just kill them directly? Exclamation mark. This must be Robb's trick. But knowing it and doing it are two different things. Kevin Lannister looked at the mountain who was still screaming and struggling, and he couldn't do such a small thing as ordering his troops to attack. To fight or not to fight, this is a question. After waiting for a while, Robb on the city wall seemed a little impatient. Robb raised his right hand slightly, and the thunder gun appeared in his hand, and then he threw it towards Kevin Lannister. Kevin Lannister saw the thunder coming, and broke out in a cold sweat. He was already in a state of mental tension, and at this time it was like a string was pulled apart, and his panic was revealed. Retreat. He was actually still some distance away from the city gate, and was not within the range of the thunder gun. But how could he have time to judge these things now? The miserable condition of the mountain was still echoing in his mind, and he just wanted to run away. The Lannister army slowly retreated before the battle began. Chapter 54 Training Commanders. 3 days after Kevin Lannister retreated from Stonehenge, the Lannister family became the laughingstock of the entire Westeros. The runaway knight, the Lord Rabbit, the cowardly commander who led 10 times more soldiers than the enemy, but was frightened and fled. Under Robb's instruction and instigation, these nicknames were given to Kevin Lannister one by one. In this era, reputation is even more important than life. After Kevin Lannister retreated to Harrenhal, he was shocked to find that he had become a joke, and he once wanted to commit suicide. Tywin snatched the sword from his hand and looked at his brother with regret. Suicide can't wash away your shame, but it will bring more shame to the Lannister family. Kevin Lannister shed tears and gritted his teeth. How dare they? What's there to be afraid of? Aren't you scared by that kid Robb? They just told the truth. Tywin's tone was full of anger. If you don't catch that kid Robb, you will never be able to wash away this humiliation. Yes, I will catch him. I will cut him into pieces. I will kill him. After seeing his brother vent his emotions, Tywin regained some reason and began to ask about all the details of the battlefield. Kevin Lannister did not hide anything and told him everything he knew. After listening, Tywin's face was uncertain. What kind of monster is this Robb Stark? How could he get rid of the mountain in such a short time? Exclamation mark. And he was able to quickly come up with a countermeasure to scare off Kevin Lannister's army. This kid's military tactics were comparable to those of an old fox. More importantly, the game between the two on the chessboard of the Riverlands was basically over. Robb captured and tortured the mountain and his men in a completely victorious manner. Together with the people Robb had captured before, the army that Tywin sent out to plunder was basically wiped out. Faced with Robb's thundering methods, no one under Tywin was willing to go out to plunder. The lords of the Riverlands who originally had some small thoughts and wanted to return to their own territories were also intimidated by Robb's methods and no longer asked Edgemure to give Robb advice. The party that wanted to spread terror was defeated by the other general. Tywin's plan to force Robb to a decisive battle was completely aborted. The current situation in the Riverlands is completely in Robb's hands. Damn it, this little wolf has become a climate and wants to eat people. Tywin slapped the table to vent his depression. He wanted to fight Robb in Harrenhal, but Robb, without pressure, could take any means other than a decisive battle. It was no longer possible to quickly decide the outcome with Robb. and Renly's 100,000 troops in the south were eyeing King's Landing at any time. His regent daughter had sent 18 letters asking him to go back to defend the capital in the name of the king and the council. The pressure from both sides was great. I can only give up this kid first. Tywin looked back and forth on the map and finally retracted his sight from Riverrun and looked to the south. The news that Tywin withdrew from Harrenhal shocked the entire Westeros. In Stonehenge, Robb was awakened by the sound of a raven knocking on the window and opened his eyes in a daze. Lifting the quilt, Robb got up, opened the window, took the letter from the raven's leg, and glanced at it. Beth Bracken in bed was awakened by Robb's action. She moaned and put on a thin silk gauze pajamas. Under the sunlight, the dress showed her perfect body curves. Beth hugged Robb from behind, then twisted her body and put her face in front of Robb, wanting to kiss this tall man. Robb pushed her away. No matter how vicious a tiger is, it will not eat its own son. Beth's eyes were as charming as silk, and she rolled her eyes at Robb. Robb didn't think there was anything wrong with getting up with Beth, including several other women from the Bracken family. Even if the people around knew about it, they didn't think there was anything wrong. This is the continent of Westeros. Robb didn't have any other considerations. Beth and the women of Bracken were too enthusiastic, and he was embarrassed to refuse. After a few glasses of wine, everything happened naturally. Beth was a very sensible woman. She didn't ask Robb to be responsible, but only asked Robb to the end. She knew that Robb had a high status, and Robb's performance in the past few days was also very obvious. He had no intention of making himself the queen. Then just keep it simple and enjoy the happiness. Beth looked at Robb's strong body and couldn't help but admire. Your Majesty, you are the real Lannister, a lion galloping on the grassland, and the prey can only wail under your majestic body. You are very good at talking, and you are really a romantic woman. Robb burned the letter in his hand and ordered the maid outside the door. Half an hour, no, an hour later, let the adult in the city go to the meeting hall. The meeting hall of Stonehenge City. Robb shared the news passed by Sir Blackfish with his men. With the help of the Red Monk Thoros and himself, the 5 Wolf Cavalry Centurions have recovered to their full state, and the Wolf Cavalry who died in the battle have also been resurrected. The price is that they lost some memory. It doesn't affect life now, but if the power of the Lord of Light is used to recover too many times, the memory will continue to be lost. Robb guessed that he might become a zombie in the Dark Soul in the end, and lose all his sanity. It seems that the magic of the Lord of Light and the Night King to resurrect the dead is quite similar in the end. You are not only the Centurion of the Wolf Riders, but you will also be the commander of other teams in the future, so you must learn to think. Especially you two, Little Jon and Eddard Stark. Your father is a brave warrior, but he has no strategy. You should learn from their bravery, but not their recklessness. Now, tell me, Tywin has evacuated from Harrenhal. What should we do? Little Jon spoke first. We should chase him and defeat him completely. Robb took out a whip from somewhere and lashed Little Jon. I just said, use your brains. Don't be a warrior who only knows how to charge into battle. You must learn to think about the situation on the battlefield. Little Jon looked aggrieved and shrank in his chair. Ned Stark bravely said, I also think we should send troops to pursue them, because we have won several victories in a row. Your Majesty is famous and the enemy's morale is at a low point, which is beneficial to us. Robb nodded without commenting. Little Jon immediately protested. He said the same thing as me. Why don't you whip him, Your Majesty? Robb whipped Little Jon again, although you have the same conclusion. Eddard has his own ideas. What about you? Chapter 55 Robb's military principles. I don't think we should chase them. When we were in the grasslands before, we didn't chase the fleeing beasts, because they were always alert. If we chased them too closely, they would attack us desperately, and they would be more dangerous than usual. Maybe it's a good choice not to fight Tywin. We have to attack quickly, because... Seeing that Eddard Stark was not whipped, the other 3 finally plucked up the courage and began to explain their ideas and gave reasons. This made Robb very satisfied. Willing to use your brain is the beginning of progress. Robb put the whip on the table. From today on, all of you must follow me to learn the theory of war. We will often hold such meetings in the future. I only have one request. Use your brains. Yes. The 5 Centurions felt that Robb's meeting would be of great significance, but they could not perceive it yet. just like everyone thought they just turned a very ordinary corner when they passed the crossroads of life. Until many years later, they would remember that ordinary afternoon. They turned a corner carelessly and then entered a new stage in life. Robb waved his hand to signal everyone to pay attention. Today I will tell you a simple truth. Think about it carefully after you go back. Write down your thoughts on Tywin's withdrawal from Harrenhal tonight and give it to me tomorrow. Yes. Although they agreed very happily, the 5 centurions looked at each other in confusion. They were still in a state of confusion. Robb cleared his throat. Remember, in war, even if we are sure of victory, we must try to avoid a decisive battle with the opponent's main force. Because once a large-scale decisive battle begins, the war will become a game of slaughter. Whoever kills faster and more will win. This is also a disaster for our team. After such a battle, just like the Battle of Stonehenge City just now, most of the soldiers are so tired that they temporarily lose the ability to kill the enemy. So before fighting, we must think clearly about what our goal is and how to achieve it through various means, instead of just killing blindly. That is stupid. Seeing that the 5 centurions were still confused, Robb gave an example. If we want to defeat an army, in addition to fighting them head on, we can also force them to surrender by besieging, harassing, and blocking their water and food sources. 300 years ago, the Stark family besieged the Bolton family in the Dreadfort. The Stark family did not attack head on. When the Bolton family ran out of food, they would naturally come out and declare their loyalty. Seeing that the few people had some clues, Robb waved and let them leave. What he figured out himself was more memorable than what others said. Telling his men to think hard, Robb himself began to review recent events. Tywin's departure did not surprise Robb. There were no Tywin's minions in the Riverlands. Here he was blind and deaf, but Robb had a lot of battlefield information. With Tywin's shrewdness, he would never let himself fall into such a situation. And Robb did not intend to hunt down Tywin. On the one hand, it was because there was not enough food and grass to support. There are 20,000 people in the north who are involved in this protracted battle. They do not engage in production, and each action consumes a lot of materials. Now the resources are being consumed at an extremely exaggerated amount every day. Robb now needs to find supplies for the army. Now that old Tywin has withdrawn, the lords of the Riverlands can return to their own territories to farm and develop. On the other hand, Robb likes to see the scene when the Southern Army collides head-on with King's Landing. This way he will have enough time to reorganize his own territory in order to quickly send troops to catch the Lannister family off guard. Robb turned a blind eye to the actions of some lords in the north and the Riverlands. Now that Tywin has withdrawn his troops, his reputation has soared through several battles, and the internal and external troubles have temporarily disappeared. Robb wants to completely stabilize his rear. Not to mention the old weasel in Luan City, the 2 places in the north, the stream bottom and the tombs of the ancestors, only sent a few soldiers to deal with him. These people have not fulfilled their obligations as vassals at all. They owed a debt, and now it was time for Robb to come and collect it. Originally, Robb had 2 main purposes for leaving Riverrun. One was to train the Wolf Riders, and the other was to visit Riverrun. Now it seems that the Wolf Riders have greatly enhanced their combat capabilities after the battles of capturing the mountain and many of Tywin's lords. At the same time, he also gained the Red Monk Thoris, and the Wolf Riders now have the ability to resurrect. This means that Robb does not have to worry about the Wolf Riders' combat power being greatly reduced after the battle damage and consumption due to the Taroshi Riders' initial joining. Now that the training part has been completed, Robb is ready to go directly to Riverrun. I still have 3 armies. One is Riverrun with more than 10,000 people. They have the strongest combat effectiveness and the highest loyalty. This group will go to the west to plunder, recover the losses in the Riverlands, and avenge the Lannister family. Another group is Old Flade's more than 10,000 people. This group is full of traitors. Old Flade, the people from the barrows of the First Men and the Streamlands are all in this team. After visiting Luan Castle, I will inspect this team. Uncle Edgemure recruited 5,000 soldiers in the Riverlands, but the combat effectiveness of these people is almost negligible. But they still have the members of the Brotherhood without banners as a backup. They can be trained a little, and when I send troops to King's Landing, let them be responsible for logistics and transportation. The yellow barrows of the First Men, Stream Bottom, and Luan Castle are also places where gold coins are exploding. Their soldiers are the main purpose of my trip this time. After reorganizing his plan, Robb did not linger in the gentle countryside of Stonehenge Castle and set off with the Wolf Riders. With resentful eyes, Bess and the sisters of the Bracken family went to Riverrun with their brothers to join their father. They would not return until the Lannister army completely withdrew from the Riverlands. This was Robb's order. A few days later, when Robb's army crossed the river and saw the river city again, the rest of the world, Catelyn Stark finally arrived at the Stormlands, where Enly Baratheon was, where Enly and Little Rose's wedding was being held. Catelyn sighed that she was a step late. Lord Titus Lakewood rushed back to Riverrun from King's Landing and brought back the Stark family's two-handed giant sword ice. Ned's ashes and Sansa had been sent to White Harbor in the north, and the Manderley family would send them back to Winterfell. And Robb's sworn brother, Theon Greyjoy, returned to the Iron Islands, where he was born, after more than 10 years of travel. Chapter 56. Am I remembering it wrong? When Robb's Wolf Riders arrived at Luan City, the situation was very different from the last time. The gates of Luan City were wide open, and the intersection in front was clean and spotless. Several cavalrymen wore neat and solemn armor and held flags with blue twin towers embroidered on a grey and white background. After seeing the flags of the Wolf Riders, the cavalrymen rolled off their horses and ran towards Robb. Long live the King of the North. Your Majesty Robb, we are waiting here on the orders of my father, just to express his humble loyalty. Long live your Majesty Robb. My father asked me to tell you, please forgive me, King of the North, I'm too ill to go out to greet you. Seeing his brothers in such an embarrassing state, Stephen Free felt angry and amused. His father was very sensible. He was able to recognize the situation so quickly and show the most humble attitude. Seeing Robb riding on his horse without saying anything, Stephen Free stepped forward and said, "Stop talking about these useless things. Your Majesty wants to see my father." "Yes, Your Majesty, my father is waiting for you in the living room, where we met last time." Robb said nothing and swaggered into the Luan City with his men. After entering the castle, everyone who saw Robb and the Wolf Riders behind him would subconsciously lower their heads and dare not look at each other. In addition to Stephen, the heir of the Free family, the Mountain also entered the living room with Robb. When the huge and terrifying body of the Mountain was carried in by several people, Robb could clearly feel that the people in Luan City almost stopped breathing. They had heard that Robb, the King of the North, had won several victories in the Riverlands, but they did not expect Robb to catch the Mountain and skin him. They were horrified to find that the Mountain was not even dead. He was tied to a spear and wailing. His painful appearance made everyone who saw him feel phantom pain. It's better to die than to live. Lord Walder Free was also different from his last arrogance. He did not sit on the high main seat, but sat at the bottom with a humble look. Seeing Robb coming, he showed an excited expression. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry I can't salute you. Please sit at the top." Robb admired this old weasel. It was not easy for such a big man to be so shameless. But based on Robb's understanding of this old weasel, although this man looked cautious, he must have something bad in his heart. Robb waved his hand and asked his men to put the spear tied to the Mountain next to the old weasel, and then naturally sat on the huge black oak chair, which was the high seat of Luan City. The huge body of the Mountain exuded a heavy smell of blood, and there were some curses in his weak wailing. These things made the old Lord Free, who was half buried in the ground, almost vomit. The Wolf Riders entered one after another and lined up around the reception room. The murderous aura and blood on them were looming, making all the Free family members at the scene feel terrified. The old Marquis Free was almost mad in his heart. "This is my Luan City. Mine. How dare you do this in the master's house?" But he didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction, but instead flattered with an old face. "Your Majesty is so young that he can capture the Mountain. It is really a great existence rarely seen in history. There is no way. Robb's power is now in its heyday. It is no longer the situation when he asked him to cross the river before. The entire North and the Riverlands follow Robb's lead. A total of 30,000 people obey Robb's dispatch, and the Lannister family has withdrawn. Now Robb can do whatever he wants in the North and the Riverlands. For example, encircle and suppress Luan City and remove the Free family. Although removing a noble is a big deal, because of what Old Free did before, and Robb's current peak reputation. The other nobles will not object, even if they are dissatisfied. These are the fundamental reasons for the fear and shrinkage of the old Marquis Free. Robb waved his hand, signaling Stevrin Free to come and stand beside him. Stevrin was like Robb's bodyguard, wearing armor, holding weapons, and guarding Robb diligently. Old Marquis Free saw that his son had completely escaped from his control, and a sense of powerlessness rose in his heart. Robb did not intend to tangle with this old weasel for too long. Old Marquis, I came here this time to fulfill my promise. Call all your daughters out. I want to choose a beautiful aunt for my uncle. The old weasel nodded immediately. It's my honor. Quick. Call all those women out. Damn it, hurry up. Stevrin Free frowned. Father, his majesty is still here. You should be careful when you speak. Don't be too vulgar. The old weasel's face rose. If Robb hadn't been here, he would have scolded his son long ago. When did my son dare to educate me? Do you want to beat me again in the future? Is it right for a son to hit his father? Although he was furious, the old weasel's face quickly returned to normal. Ah, yes, it's my fault, your majesty. Please forgive me. Robb waved his hand generously. It's okay. The old Marquis is old after all. We should be more tolerant of the elderly. The women of the Free family came in. Robb got off the high seat and began to carefully look for the most beautiful Free woman in the room. When Uncle Edgemere heard that he was going to marry the Free family, his sad face almost scared the children on the road. When I send that beautiful woman over, Uncle Edgemere will show his true love. While looking at the women, Robb talked to the old weasel casually. Lord Free, I heard that my grandfather called you the late Lord Free, because when he led the Riverlands to help King Robert oppose the Mad King, you were the only one who was late, and came when the war was almost over. A layer of cold sweat broke out on the old weasel's back. This is. I don't think this nickname is wrong. You see, my grandfather summoned you to attack the Westerly again, and you are late again. Now these 4,000 people are still eating and drinking in your castle, while other people in the Riverlands are fighting desperately. The old weasel quickly expressed his loyalty. Your majesty, I'm willing to lead these 4,000 people to the battle, and I will never break my promise. Robb chuckled. Ha ha ha, the old Marquis is really like a good sword that has been old. He still wants to go to the battlefield at this age. Having said that, Robb suddenly paused, a puzzled expression on his face, and then looked at Lord Free. Hey, old Marquis, you have experienced the war against the Mad King, and have so many children. You must be quite old, right? Are you over 100 years old? The old weasel was also stunned for a moment, a little confused. Your majesty, I'm over 90 years old this year, not even 100. Robb was puzzled. Could it be that I remembered it wrong? Chapter 57. I'm still not mistaking it. The old weasel was actually a smart man. He had a keen sense of politics and immediately smelled something different from Robb's words. The wolf riders around him were also reminding him all the time. His majesty, who had just fought a war, killed people, and skinned people, was not here to discuss marriage with him. Who would come to a marriage with so many knights with blood on their bodies? After Robb finished speaking, he ignored the old weasel and began to seriously choose a wife for his uncle. The old Marquis Free dragged his old body and followed Robb with a struggle between his conscience and his desires. Robb waited for a while and finally heard the old weasel say something that suddenly dawned on him. Hey, your majesty, I just calculated it myself, and I'm indeed over 100 years old. The older I get, the less useful I am. I can't even remember my own age. Robb turned around slowly, admired the expression on the old weasel's face, and found it a little funny. So, I remembered it wrong? The old weasel's face showed no strangeness. I'm old and confused. Look at me in this state, and I still want to lead troops to fight. It's really funny. Your majesty, I'm making a fool of myself. Robb showed an embarrassed expression on his face. Old Marquis, you are an old veteran who has experienced many wars. Without your help, it will be difficult for me to do it. The old weasel quickly took advantage of the situation and said, Your majesty is really flattering, but I can't ride a horse at my age. But my sons are still in their prime. They can be loyal to you on my behalf. Robb quickly refused. That won't work. After all, your sons are not real Marquesses. Even if he can command the troops of Luon City, he can't be as relaxed as you, old Marquis. The old weasel was about to explode with anger. Why is this damn little wolf not satisfied? What does he want? Exclamation mark. After a long silence, the old weasel finally spoke with difficulty. Your Majesty, I'm too old. I heard that the old Duke of Riverine is seriously ill in bed, and now the affairs of Riverine are managed by Lord Edgemere. The old Duke and I are in similar situations. My son Stevron is also brave, and has some experience on the battlefield. I'm also going to slowly hand over some things in Riverine to him. Stevron stood behind Robb with an incredible expression on his face. Father, I don't know much about these. If you hand them over to me rashly, I'm afraid. It's okay, I will teach you slowly. Robb coughed. Sir Stevron, how could you do this? Your Majesty, your father is in poor health, and he needs you to share the burden. How can you ignore your responsibilities and obligations like this? Stevron looked guilty and realized his mistake. Yes, your Majesty is right. I didn't think it through. Robb was very satisfied with Stevron's attitude of admitting his mistakes. In this case, you should immediately help your father share the pressure and post notices in the city. Call the Grand Secretary of Luon City and find out everything you need to know. Don't be lazy and let your father down. You have to help share the affairs of Luon City, especially the taxation of the villages below, and the management of the 4,000 soldiers in the city. These are all troublesome things. Don't let your father worry about these things anymore. Steve Lund said righteously. Yes, your Majesty. I will definitely help my father manage Luon City and let my father have a good rest. The two of them sang in unison and basically settled the matter. The owner of Luon City, the old weasel, was stunned to see everything developing in a direction that was beyond his control, but he was powerless. He couldn't get a word in. When everything was almost explained, Robb was too lazy to say anything, and pointed at the most beautiful free woman. That's it. I think Uncle Edgemere will like it. I'll be staying in Riverside these days. Sir Stevron, report to me after you've dealt with everything. Little John, take someone to clean out the bedroom of the old yellow rat, old Lord Free. I can't leave him without a place to sleep if I sleep in his room. Yes, your Majesty. Stevron and the Wolf Riders immediately got busy. No one cared about Lord Walder Free, who was still standing in the middle of the reception room. When everyone left, Lord Free was still standing there in a daze. His face was extremely gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. Just when Robb led his men to station in Riverside and prepared to recruit 4,000 people from Riverside, Theon Greyjoy was meeting his father. The smoke-filled hall of Pike City in the Iron Islands. Theon's father, the master of the Iron Islands, King Balon, sat on the Seaston throne. There are many islands in the Iron Islands, and each island has its own owner. Just like the vassals under the north, they are all chieftains and captains under King Balon. They are all gathered together at this time. 3 burly men performed the finger dance, with a series of short-handled axes thrown back and forth between the 3 people. This dance is named because it can cut off fingers at any time. On the left of King Balon are his 2 younger brothers, and on the right is his daughter Asha. Theon, wearing simple clothes, came to Asha and said stiffly, "You sat in my seat." Asha looked at him innocently. "Brother, you must be mistaken. Your seat is in Winterfell." "Hey, where are your beautiful clothes? I heard that you like to dress yourself up with silk down." Asha wanted to tease Theon when he first arrived in the Iron Islands, but during the time with the Wolf Riders, Theon learned to control himself. Theon looked into her eyes. "According to the law, I was born a prince. Now, leave my seat. According to the laws of the Greenland, that may be right. But here, we have our own rules. Have you forgotten that?" Theon glanced at his father and saw that he had no intention of intervening. He also knew his attitude. He was a little angry. He had been away from the Iron Islands for more than 10 years, but he was returned with such an attitude. Theon grabbed Asha's hair fiercely, with a fierce expression on his face. "Damn bitch, I still like you when I was 9 years old. Now you seem to be a little disrespectful." Asha was caught off guard. She didn't expect Theon to be so bold and dare to attack her in front of so many people. She roared angrily and took out a dagger from her chest, wanting to teach her brother, who she hadn't seen for more than 10 years, a lesson. Theon had originally taken the initiative to attack, directly holding down her arm to prevent her from taking out her weapon, and then the hand holding her hair pulled back fiercely, causing Asher to lose balance. In his career as a wolf rider, although Theon did not change his character in his bones, he understood that he should not be soft-hearted when dealing with the enemy. He raised his fist, wanting to hit his sister's face hard, and announced to everyone in the Iron Islands that your prince is me. Enough. King Balon, who had been watching the show, finally spoke up to stop the farce. Robb's military class. Why to avoid decisive battles? This class took place on the way from Stonehenge City to Luan City, and there were 5 centurions in the class. Sun Tzu's Art of War. Annihilation theory. A large army requires a large command system. So if you want to annihilate the enemy, it is not just a way to surround the enemy and kill them, but you can use various means to disperse the enemy and make it unable to cooperate with the movement so as to achieve the goal. We can defeat them one by one before they gather, decapitation operations, sneak attacks, etc. If you get into a decisive battle with the main force, it will be a gamble, and all other possibilities will disappear, and the uncertainty is too great. The decisive battle with the main force is a killing competition. Even if you have a huge advantage, there may be unpredictable emergencies, and factors such as morale, weather, and reinforcement are all uncontrollable. Therefore, avoiding a decisive battle means eliminating the enemy's ability to launch a decisive battle in advance, and not giving the enemy the opportunity to exert its strength. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 58 Baron's Route. Theon looked at his father and let go of his hand. Asher was furious and stood up suddenly, staring at Theon with the eyes of a beast looking at its prey, as if she wanted to cut her own brother into pieces. King Balon looked at his son. You are quite brave, which is what an Ironman should be like. So, why did you come back? Theon Greyjoy looked at the strangers in the room. The king in the north has publicly announced the end of my hostage life. Of course I have to go home. So, have you thought it through? Do you want to be a Stark or a Greyjoy? A trace of hesitation flashed across Theon's face. He didn't want to be an enemy of Robb yet. It was not because of the years of brotherhood, but because Robb's invincible posture on the battlefield made him a little afraid. But Theon finally made his own decision. He was determined to prove himself, not only to his father, but also to the entire Westeros. Theon Greyjoy is not a hostage trapped by the Stark family, but the future master of the Iron Islands. Robb was a good man and trusted him, but he couldn't give him what he wanted. Of course I want the last name Greyjoy. It's the name I was born with. King Balon nodded. Very good. Since you have made your decision, then have a drink, and come to my study. I will announce my plan. He said no more, turned around and left, followed by 2 bodyguards. His brothers followed immediately. After Theon had eaten and drunk enough, he staggered across the drawbridge and walked towards his father's study in the tower in the sea. Asher followed Theon. Theon was drunk, but he was very energetic. What, you want to push me into the sea while I'm drunk? Asher looked at her brother with some curiosity. You should know that, even if you come back, your father will not believe you. It doesn't matter, I will prove to him who is truly suitable to lead the Iron Islands. Theon didn't want to pay attention to his sister. In his opinion, his sister was just a bitch who used some tricks to make his father happy when he was away. As for her desire to get involved in the throne of the Iron Islands, dream on. There may be a woman who can be king in Westeros, but in the Iron Islands, this will never happen. Because of the shortage of production materials in the Iron Islands and the tough folk customs, the Iron Islands basically rely on robbery as the main means of survival. They have robbed most of the countries on the Westeros continent. In this kind of cultural influence, the status of women can be imagined. In the Iron Islands, a man can marry multiple wives, and the more wives he marries, the higher the status of the man. Women are basically no different from objects. So Theon believed that no matter how much Asher was favored by King Balon now, she had no capital to compete with him for the position of Lord of the Iron Islands. The two came to the study, which was as humid and ventilated as usual. Father King Balon, wrapped in a sealskin robe, sat in front of the brazier, and his two younger brothers sat on both sides. King Balon said hoarsely, "I will tell you the plan now, just follow it." Theon quickly stepped forward to offer advice. "Father, I'm very familiar with the situation in the north. My suggestion is,